Dalia Ziada is a prominent Egyptian civil rights activist who played a central role in Egypt's 2011 revolution against the Mubarak regime. She's been named by CNN as one of the 8 agents of change in the Middle East and by the Daily Beast as one of the most fearless women in the world. For years, Dalia has worked with policymakers to advance liberal democratic values and human rights in Egypt. Dalia, thank you very much for joining me today. You decided to speak the truth, to speak out against Hamas, and you were almost killed for it.
My story did not start on October 7. It started about 20 years ago or more when I was a student in a university in Cairo. I grew up in a very conservative society. As you know, Egypt have a very hostile atmosphere towards Israel in general and towards the Jewish people also. Growing up in this hostile environment prompted me somehow to join these protesters. But actually, after 2 months of joining these protesters, something extraordinary happened, something that created some kind of cognitive dissonance for me happened when on one of the beautiful sunny days of Cairo, we were protesting as usual, calling for justice in Gaza and saying all bad things about Israel. And then the people organizing the protesters decided to burn some flags. And these people, by the way, I learned later that they are the Muslim Brotherhood. So they started by burning the Israeli flag, which made sense. It's a protest against Israel. Then they burned the American flag, which was a bit confusing to me. I didn't understand why would burning a flag of a country that exists thousands of miles away from Gaza would help the people in Gaza. And then the third flag they decided to burn was my Egyptian flag. And this was a very shocking moment for me. At that moment, I felt like I'm in the wrong place. I shouldn't be here. I don't belong to these people. And it was the moment I opened my eyes and I broke out, I would say, out of the ideological box. And I started to educate myself about Israel, about Judaism, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, about the Middle East geopolitics. And since that day, it has become my mission to fight against radical Islamists, fight for democratization in my country, Egypt, and also for peace between Muslims and Jews on the bigger, worldwide, on the bigger picture, and also peace between Arabs and Israelis.
On October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists invaded southern Israel, killing 1,200 Israelis and taking more than 200 hostages, men, women, children, and elderly.
It was said in our Arab media and Egyptian media that it was only a clash between Israeli soldiers and Hamas militants.
وأعتقد أن حماس حتى هذه اللحظة أدارت اللعبة بمنتهى المهنية بمنتهى الاحترافية.
Which, as you know, we hear this piece of news every 2 weeks, so it was not something new. About 1 week after October 7 happened, I was invited to a press conference made by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense in Israel. And they brought, it was in Arabic, and they brought over 200 people from the Arab world, journalists, activists, writers, all sorts of people, like influencers even from social media. And to show us, they wanted to show us what happened on October 7th, to show us footage and videos and information about what really happened on October 7th. After ending this video conference, I remember how I was so furious. I was so angry, not only because of the brutality of what I have seen, but also mainly because of these terrible people who were celebrating this, my fellow Arabs and Muslims who were celebrating this, celebrating the killing of children, the raping of women, the kidnapping of the elderly. They are celebrating it. And I felt like someone has to speak up. Someone has to tell them that what they're doing is wrong. And it's not acceptable to celebrate that some human being brutalized just because this human happened to be a Jew. At the end of the day, they are humans. It's not acceptable, and we should not be celebrating this. And what Hamas did is pure terrorism. It cannot be justified. It cannot be explained in any way. I had to speak, and I thought if no one else would speak, I should do that. I felt compelled, really, to stand up for these victims of October 7, and I'm glad I did. And by the way, if time goes back and I knew that I will be exposed to all of that and I will suffer all these consequences, I would still do it.
In response to Dalia condemning Hamas's October 7th massacre, Egyptian state media and establishment figures waged a campaign of incitement against her.
اسمها داليا زيادة.
منهم شخصية اسمها داليا زيادة.
أنا داليا زيادة أو داليا زبالة. صهيونية مين دي؟ أسوأ من الصهيونية.
It started first by radical Islamists wanting to kill me. Even the issue, the fact was that my blood is sacred no more, and a group of them who existed in my family neighborhood went to our family house looking for me. They wanted to kill me. And then when I contacted the security authorities in Egypt to tell them I need protection, unfortunately their response was that let them kill you. We are not going to protect you because you said you support Israel.
Facing persecution and imprisonment, Dalia had only hours to flee her native Egypt. With the help of supporters, she managed to escape to the US, where she is currently seeking asylum. Your stance doesn't go against Egypt's official stance. Egypt and Israel have full diplomatic and economic ties since the late 70s. It's been over 50 years. They have very close security collaboration. Egypt has spoken out against Hamas. It's also been a mediator in the hostage negotiations. So how do you explain this dissonance between the government and public opinion within everyday Egyptian people when it comes to Israel?
I believe that Israel's security means Egypt's security. And peace in Israel means peace in Egypt. Stability in Israel means stability in Egypt. At the end of the day, Egypt is my home country, and it will always be. Regardless of what happened with me, I'm sure one day it will be corrected, but it will always remain my home country. And I want it to be a great country. And I know that Egypt can only be great. I know by experience, by the way, I'm not only expecting, that Egypt will be a great country if it establishes good relationships with its immediate neighbor, Israel. Remember what happened in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. I remember this very well. I was one of the leaders of the Arab Spring, and I saw with my own eyes when Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Sinai in late 2011 and early 2012 and established terrorist organization there. At that time, they were killing Egyptian civilians, especially Coptic Christians in Sinai, Arish, in northern Sinai. And they were targeting Egyptian soldiers. Hundreds of young people were killed on their hands. And there, the terrorist cells that Hamas and the Islamic Jihad planted inside Sinai in those years, later on formed what is called Wilayat Sinai by ISIS, by Daesh. And it was terrible until in the year 2013, 2014, Egypt and Israel started to cooperate together in order to get rid of these terrorists. And Egypt, it was not possible for Egypt to be able to fight against Hamas terrorists and end the terrorism in Sinai without the security cooperation and military cooperation from Israel. But unfortunately, again, what was happening was only happening on the state level. On the people-to-people level, it was not matching with the people-to-people level. We still continue to see media, the Egyptian media, for example, speaking negatively about Israel, describing Israel as our historical enemy. We continue to see that Egypt is declining to celebrate the peace treaty with Israel. You know, my whole life, I was born after the peace treaty was signed, and my whole life, every year, we celebrate the anniversary of October 7 of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, but we don't celebrate the anniversary of the peace treaty. I never saw it in my whole life. For generations, they have been brainwashed by systematic content from the media. Also, unfortunately, it now reached a point where it has become impossible for the leadership in Egypt to challenge this general public, because Egypt right now is in a very fragile position economically and politically, and because of the economic crisis in Egypt. And so it seems that the leadership in Egypt did not want to double the outrage against them, the public outrage against them, by also, preventing to speak about the Palestinian cause, as they call it. They had to play for the domestic audience.
What is it that these so-called Middle East experts in the West get wrong time and time again about this region?
Our region is very complicated, as you know. Many people, for example, don't understand right now who's fighting with who and who's supporting who, and why they are doing that. They don't understand the ideological motives behind every move that's happening in the region. And also the very critical shift that happened in the past 5 to 7 years, especially after the Abraham Accords, from being a region where ideology and emotions controlled everything to a region that's trying to, where its countries, at least key players in the region, are trying to be more pragmatic. In the quest for achieving Arab-Israeli normalization initiatives in the past few years, many of the Western countries, including the United States, dropped a very important factor, which is democratization in the region, which actually made all the normalization initiatives that were taken being built on a very fragile ground. And thus, as soon as something like October 7 happened, it collapsed. It was really shaken in a very bad way, because the basis, the people-to-people dialogue, the democratization of the Arab societies and Arab communities and Arab states did not happen. And thus, people are still falling under the influence of radicals, either political radicals or hardliners in the different Arab regimes, or also under the radical Islamists. People are still so confused here in the US about the Middle East region, or in the West in general, I would say, is that they are looking at the current conflict in the region as if it is a Middle East issue. We are beyond the era of Arab-Israeli conflict already. I think Arabs are not interested in conflict with Israel. They are more aligned to having normal relationships with Israel and accepting Israel as an integral part of the Middle East region, and accept the Israeli people as indigenous to the Middle East. However, what we are watching today is in fact a war between Iran, the Islamic regime in Iran, and the West. And they are capitalizing on the historical Arab-Israeli conflict in order, the Islamic regime in Iran is capitalizing on the historical Arab-Israeli conflict so it can legitimize its activities against Israel. Iran is not fighting Israel for the same reasons Arabs fought against Israel a few decades ago. Actually, Iran is fighting Israel because it sees Israel as a representative of the West. It's the small Satan, as they call it, and the US is the greater Satan, or the bigger Satan. So from this concept, that's why Iran is doing all of that. That's why Iran surrounded Israel with all these militias. That's why Iran incited Hamas to do what they did on October 7 in order to halt a potential normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Let's focus on the bigger picture. Let's get together and fight against Iran. Let's get together, Arabs and Israelis, and also the United States, because it's a stakeholder in this war. Let's get together, fight against Iran, kill this head of the snake, or head of the octopus, let's say, so it will not be able to cause any future chaos in the region, and thus peace will be possible to achieve. De-escalation will be possible to achieve, let's say. So for this to happen, Arabs and Israelis need to come together.
Dalia Ziada, thank you very much for joining us today to share your incredible story of bravery, choosing to stand up for the truth No matter the very big price that you've had to pay, you've had to flee your home, you are currently filing for asylum in the United States, for speaking out against Hamas in your home country of Egypt. Dalia, you're a force of nature. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Sarah.